Dan Steele with WASA's Government Relations, here to talk to you about our hot topics from our 2019 Legislative Conference. February 10th and 11th, we are scheduled for our annual WASA, WASDA, and WASBO Legislative Conference and Day on the Hill. And obviously, you know that we had a pretty severe snowstorm and we had to actually cancel our conference. We lost our venue, and also the legislature was closed on Monday, so it wouldn't have been any good. So it was a little bit of a lost opportunity for us to come together collectively with our colleagues and actually approach the Hill and talk about our hot topics and our combined priorities. So because we had that lost opportunity, we felt it would be important to actually remind you that you need to stay engaged and actually provide you the information on the hot topics that we prepared, again, our collective priorities. So today I'm going to walk through some of the priorities and then again with an encouragement to be involved. On the webpage, our WASA webpage, under the Professional Learning tab, and followed there under the Conference Resources, and then the next tab is Legislative Conference. There are hot topics documents, both the large document, which provides a lot of background details and some talking points, as well as the smaller document, which we like to use as a leave behind with legislators. We encourage you to actually print that up. It's printed front and back and folded in half, and you've got a nice little brochure. We'd encourage you to actually, as you're meeting with legislators, to take that with you to provide for them. Or if you're meeting with them via email, just attach that on so you have those talking points with you. So again, I'm going to walk through these hot topics and encourage you, if you have questions, to certainly send me an email or give me a call as we go forward, because we want you to be as knowledgeable as possible. This year we have four particular pieces on our hot topics, again, collaboratively with WASA, WASDA, and WASBO. Four priorities are student health and safety, equitable education investments, school facilities, and a school day definition. So I'm going to walk through each of these pieces, give you the high points and some of the background, and then the talking points as well. So the first one, student school health and safety. We knew coming into the session that mental health was going to be one of the big buzz phrases for 2019. And we thought it was important for school safety to be attached to that. So during the summer, there was a mass shootings work group that came together to provide recommendations comprised of police officers and sheriffs, mental health folks, and OSPI, and some school folks were also involved in that process as well. And they came up with a number of school safety related recommendations, and many of those recommendations have been incorporated in the bills as we're carrying forward during this legislative session. So we think it's really important, obviously, to have safe and healthy schools. We need to have students and staff feel safe and secure as they go to school. And so this is an important issue for us. And again, we knew with the McCleary decision coming forward that a lot of legislators were saying that K-12 got theirs, we're ready to move on to other issues. And so we wanted to kind of latch on to that mental health conversation and bring that conversation back to K-12 so we could actually have a benefit from that. So again, the mass shootings work group came up with a series of recommendations, and the major recommendations really deal with a school safety center, both statewide and regionally, that would provide threat assessments for school districts. The two main bills that are going through the process are House Bill 1216, House Bill 1216, and a companion bill, Senate Bill 5317. Those two bills would actually incorporate a number of the recommendations from the work group and deal again with threat assessments, and also would be providing a school safety center both at the state level and the regional level at the local ESDs. This has been a priority for the AESD for a number of years, and it's also on WASA's platform, and I believe on WASDA's platform as well. So we're asking for two things specifically under the school safety issue. First of all, we think people is the main priority, and so What we're asking for is an enhancement in the prototypical school funding model for school safety personnel. Specifically, there's three areas in the prototypical school funding model. The first one is health and social services, which deals with nurses, psychologists, social workers, and other mental health professionals. The second area is guidance counselors, which is just like it sounds. It would provide additional guidance counselors to the middle schools and high schools. And then the third area is school and staff security. And this is where the SROs, school resource officers, are housed. And so we're asking for enhancements for staffing allocations in all three of those areas would have a direct impact on school health and safety. And I'll also tell you, behind the scenes, we're also believing that once we crack that door open to the prototypical school funding model, we want to push our way through the door and have the entire prototypical school funding model be reviewed and revamped, because the values that are provided there are almost 10 years old and need to be adjusted throughout. But the focus of this particular session, again, are those three different areas in the prototypical school funding model that directly relate to school health and safety. The second area, as I've already talked about, is again asking for a statewide school safety support provided through a safety center, both statewide and again regionally. And the two bills that I mentioned, 1216 and 5317, would accomplish that. So those are the main areas there. And the part of the idea is, even if we did get the increases in the staffing allocations for nurses and SROs and that sort of thing, there are a number of districts that still wouldn't have the actual supports they need to do threat assessments or some of the other safety measures that are required or necessary. And you could actually go to your local ESD and use their resources and have them provide some information for you. So I want to move on to the second area. The second area is equitable education investments. And this is our kind of deja vu issue, dealing with corrections or fixes to House Bill 2242. The McCleary solution was adopted in 2017. And then the McCleary fix bill adopted last year, Senate Bill 6362. Even though legislators believe they've solved all the problems and provided full funding for education, we know that's not true, and there's still a series of fixes that need to be provided. We focused in on three issues for our hot topics: special education, correcting the current levy and local effort assistance policies, and then also dealing with the School Employee Benefits Board. So let me back up. Remember, in 2017, the legislature came together, adopted a pretty comprehensive overhaul of school finance in House Bill 2242. They sent that to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court essentially checked off on it and said, you're all good to go, with the exception of the provision of salary dollars. The legislature came back in 2018, provided a few fixes to 2242, but they didn't go far enough. They weren't broad enough. So they didn't actually fix the system. It just made some adjustments. And then they provided that $1 billion to all of you that made you actually go out and bargain all summer. And so what we're coming back now is to actually say those two bills still have some serious deficiencies and we need some corrections to it. The first area is special education. Special education is underfunded across the board, and legislators have come forward and actually admit that they didn't fully fund special education. They want to actually solve this problem. So what we're asking for is a full funding support for special education, and we've got data from OSPI that shows there's an underfunded need between $300 and $400 million. Legislators, as I said, really want to solve this problem, but we've got an unfortunate situation that they're not quite sure how to solve the problem in terms of driving dollars out. But more specifically, the concern is many legislators believe a $30 or $40 million influx in cash to the state for special education would solve the problem. We think that that's just not true. And so when we're asking for special education full funding, again, that number that we have is between $300 and $400 million, and we need that as quickly as possible. The second area is the levy capacity and local effort assistance. When the legislature adopted 2242, they completely changed the levy system in this state, changed from a percentage of your overall state and federal revenues as a levy lid cap. And they also changed that to $1.50 per thousand or $2,500 per student, whichever is less. And that had a dramatic impact across the state, with levies dropping pretty severely, and anywhere between 40 and 50%. And there's a handful of districts that lose as much as 60%. They also changed the local effort assistance process, or levy equalization, that they're capped out at $1,500. So you may have a property-rich neighbor that can raise up to $2,500 per student, and your property-poor district can only raise $1,500 per student with some additional assistance from the state. We don't think that's equitable at all, and we think that there needs to be an overhaul of the new policies. There's a lot of bills on the table, a lot of conversation about how they're going to do that. It appears that one of the things most folks are talking about is taking away that $1.50 per thousand and going back to an overall percentage lid based off of your state and federal revenues. We're not sure if that's going to be the ultimate outcome, but a lot of conversation around that. Our position at WASA, WASB, and WASBO is that we actually believe there does need to be a modest increase in levy capacity, because there are some districts that really do need additional levy capacity. But we also think there need to be limits or very clear fences put around that new money to make sure that it doesn't get used inappropriately on basic education items or bargained away for salaries. And the third thing, if there is a levy lid increase or additional capacity, it has to come with a commensurate increase in local effort assistance or levy equalization to make sure that our current disparities between districts don't get exacerbated by having a large levy lid increase and not providing anything for those districts that can't raise a large levy. The third issue is the School Employee Benefit Board implementation. Many of you know that as a part of 2242, they changed the healthcare system for school districts, took away the bargaining ability at the local level for health benefits for all school employees. And now everybody will be, starting in January 1st, 2020, all school employees will be in a single statewide risk pool. Whether that's a good plan or not, the concern we have is the huge financial burden. At the state level, it's going to cost about $900 million to fully fund the state impact for the system. But what we're more concerned about are the local levy costs. Local school districts have between $200 and $300 million of a local cost just because of the threshold changes in eligibility. What the state did as part of this bill is actually lower the threshold that if a school employee works at least 630 hours a year, they're fully eligible for full benefits, as well as their dependents getting full benefits. That's not the way it works in the public employees benefit system, but that's the way they've charted it out for school districts. So because of the huge eligibility, as well as the number of employees that you have that are federally or locally funded, which the state isn't going to pick up costs for, there's going to be a huge local cost. So what we've asked the legislature is that they fully fund not just the state costs, but fully fund the cost for the implementation of SEB for all eligible employees. It's not likely that that's going to happen, but we think it's the right thing to ask for. But our secondary call is to say, if you can't provide full funding for all eligible employees, you need to actually deny the tentative agreement between the unions and OFM, the governor's office, and come back another day, delay this process so we can figure out a way that it can be assist school districts. There's a lot of conversation in Olympia right now, legislators who are kind of shocked at the huge impact at the state level, but what they're not hearing or not understanding, most of them, are the local impacts. So our message again is to make sure that legislators understand the huge cost to local school districts. OSPI just a few days ago came out with their estimate of a statewide levy impacts, and it's about $258 million. Huge impact to local school districts, and we think that that's not a fair thing to force an unfunded mandate on local school districts and force them to use levy dollars for a state obligation. The third priority, the third hot topic, is school facilities. It's been a major priority of WASA and WASDAs and WASBO for a number of years to make sure that we can actually enhance the outdated and underfunded school construction assistance program grant funding formulas. Excuse me, both the school space allocation as well as a construction cost allowance. Both of those are woefully inadequate. We do have to give kudos to the legislature for having K-12 education being a priority in the capital budget for a number of years. We're pleased about that. And they have, in fact, quote unquote, fully funded all requests for many years. It's been over 30 years since OSPI was forced to actually do a prioritized waiting list because there are more requests for money than there was money available. But even though the legislature has provided this full funding, they've provided full funding for woefully inadequate formulas. The student space allocation and the construction cost allowance formulas are so low that it doesn't actually account for actual school district space needs, and it doesn't actually account for the actual costs of school buildings. So we'd like to see an overhaul of that, as well as a few other things. The first one is to actually assist some of our small rural districts that don't have bonding capacity. Either they're at their local debt limit or they just have difficulty passing bonds. Senate Bill 5572 is a bill that would provide modernization grants to small school districts that have less than 1,000 students. And again, most of those folks that have difficulty raising a bond, or even if they could actually pass a bond, they may be at their local debt limit and not be able to actually access those dollars. So 5572 has some momentum behind it, and we're actually supporting that, hoping it goes through. We're also continuing to support the simple majority for school district bonds. We think that it's horribly unfair to use a system that was put in place during the Depression that requires a 60% supermajority to adopt bonds. And we've got some momentum on this issue. This year, there's two sets of bills: Senate Joint Resolution 8201 and its implementing bill, Senate Bill 5066. And there's also a companion bill on the House side, House Joint Resolution 4203, and its implementing bill, House Bill 1184. Remember that a constitutional amendment requires a 2/3 vote by both the House and the Senate, and then it'll be put on the November ballot for the voters to actually accept or reject. One of our messages, you can tell all of your stories, and we encourage you to tell your stories of your difficulty of actually achieving a 60% majority to provide safe and healthy schools in your district. But one of our messages to the legislators is, even though they may not personally support the simple majority, all we're really asking for is for them to allow the voters and their constituents of the state to amend their own constitution. So we're continuing to push these bills. They've been heard in both the House and the Senate. Presumably they will be passed out of their original House policy committees in the next week or so, and then we'll carry forward, and hopefully we'll get some momentum. Also want to mention there's another set of bills, Senate Joint Resolution 8202 and Senate Bill 5252. This is a compromise proposal that would not go to the simple majority, but would allow school district bonds to be adopted by a 55% vote. Our message from WASA, WASDA, and WASBO is we support the simple majority, the pure simple majority, 50% plus one, because that's the right thing to do. But if at some point we realize those bills aren't going to be able to be achieved and there might be an opportunity for the 55% bill to be achieved, we'll approach our members and ask whether or not we should support that or not. We don't want to compromise at this early stage of the game, though, because if we drop down to support 55%, we believe we will probably never be able to go back and ask for a simple majority. So we support the pure option. We're continuing to keep an eye on the compromise. And if movement occurs on either of those, we'll continue to keep you apprised. The third issue, as I already mentioned, dealing with the School Construction Assistance Grant Program, SCAP, the formulas being woefully inadequate. There is a bill that would actually take recommendations from a joint task force on improving school construction funding that would actually implement enhancements to SCAP. That bill is Senate Bill 5853. The bill actually has 39 sponsors in the Senate. So without even having a conversation about it, that bill already has a majority of senators ready to go. This bill has a little bit of momentum. We're assuming it's going to pass out of the Senate fairly quickly, may have a more difficult road in the House. But this bill actually would achieve what we've been asking for years of providing more realistic formula drivers for student space allocation and construction cost allowance. One important note that you need to know about this bill is it actually delay the implementation for a few years, and it would actually have a phase-in of the new formula increases over about a 10-year period of time. So it would be fairly far out into the future before we got these realistic reforms. But we're supporting the bill and actually supporting the timelines because something in this case is better than nothing. And it would also, if the bill were to be adopted, even though the phase-in would be sometime out into the future, it would actually provide a statutory commitment for the legislature to actually achieve the bills. So we're supporting that bill, and we think it's got a good chance of actually being adopted, especially with 39 out of 49 senators actually signing on to the bill. The fourth issue is something a little bit different, something we've been focusing on for the last year or so, and we think it's one of the most important issues of this session, and that's the school day definition. You might recall last year the WA was talking about bargaining strategy, that they would actually go to the bargaining table and say that they would be willing to work 5.7 hours a day, but anything above and beyond that needs to be paid via enrichment. We were very concerned about that, and we started approaching legislators immediately after we heard this strategy being bandied about, and got commitments from legislators in all four caucuses to actually address this issue. We had an amendment ready to go for Senate Bill 6362, which again was a McCleary fix bill, that would have specifically defined professional duties of a teacher and made it very clear that salaries that are allocated for teachers are for more than just instruction. It's for all of the other professional expectations, including professional development and planning, collaboration with other employees, meeting with teachers, and the like. Unfortunately, the legislature decided not to adopt that amendment that we provided, and instead they actually established a school day task force. The school day task force met in the fall last year, and in January, Superintendent Rakedahl submitted recommendations based off of conversations with the task force. And essentially what he said is there's three different segments of a teacher's workday. The first is the actual direct instruction in the classroom, actually teaching students. The second bucket is additional work within the school building during the school day, again, collaboration, professional development, and the like. And the third area was additional work that's non-directed that teachers do out of the school building after school hours, whether it be grading homework or doing other things that they need to do. We thought it was a pretty reasonable approach to actually talk about those three different buckets. The concern we had, though, is in the second bucket, again, that time in school, in the school building that's non-directed and after instructional hours. The recommendation from Superintendent Reichdahl made it very clear that those hours and that work needed to be collectively bargained. We are very concerned about that. We think that would actually implement either status quo or perhaps even worse if that were to be implemented in law. So what we've asked the legislature is to actually specifically define the school day, use those three different buckets if you would like to, but there needs to be a definition coming from the legislature and not collectively bargained about what those professional duties and expectations are. So we think the legislature needs to clearly define, again, the minimum professional duties and expectations. And again, it should be a part of the statute and not a part of collective bargaining. There is a bill that's been introduced just this week, Senate Bill 5933, that would actually accomplish this. The language is a little bit different than what we've been talking about in the last year, but it actually, we believe it's at least a shot across the bow that would very specifically define teachers have more than just instructional time to do duties. And so we're hoping that that bill will actually have some momentum and we'll continue to talk about this issue with legislators. So those are the four hot topics that we encourage you to continue to talk to your legislators about, whether it be in town in Olympia or via email or conversations back home with your legislators. But we really think it's important that you continue to engage. We did lose a little bit of an opportunity with the cancellation of our legislative conference to have 500 school board members and administrators and business officials approach the legislature collectively, but we think we can actually capture that opportunity if you folks continue to come forward and remain engaged on these issues. We are also continuing to work with our colleagues at WASDA and WASBO to see if there might be an opportunity to have some sort of collective engagement on the Hill. It may be difficult to achieve, but we're continuing to see explore the opportunities and see if there may be a way to do that. But barring that, again, we think that you need to be individually fully engaged with the legislative session. We're about a third of the way through the 2019 session. There's plenty of opportunity to engage. Legislators are going to soon start shifting towards focusing in on budget issues, which is another great opportunity to jump in and impact the legislators. But we encourage you to actually take these talking points we've provided to you out of the hot topics, work with your colleagues locally, and again, continue to be engaged. And with that, I'll go ahead and close, but I encourage you to continue to follow our This Week in Olympia newsletter and also the podcasts that we do on a weekly or more frequent basis. And if you have questions about any of these issues, feel free to call any of the folks at WASA, myself or Joel or anybody else on staff to see if we can provide you any information. Thank you for listening and taking your time to be with us.